You mentioned a while back there, Roger Scruton. Just something else he said and has talked about and indeed done programs about. And that is how we have abandoned the whole idea of beauty now. And in fact, there's an idea that somehow ugliness holds within it truth, and it's no longer beauty and truth. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. Well, you know that Roger Scruton's work has had a massive impact upon me, and he was very kind. I wanted to use some quotes from his lectures in a lecture I gave at Harvard Business School a couple of years ago, and he very kindly said, "Oh, I'll look through your lecture if you like." So I had planned to go and spend a few days with him at his house in Gloucestershire, but unfortunately he passed away this time last year. But the thing that most people associate with Roger is that TV broadcast called the Power of Beauty, in which he opened by saying, if you'd asked anybody between 1750 and 1930 what was the purpose of art, literature, music, they would have said beauty. And when you asked them what was the purpose of beauty, they would say it was a value like goodness and truth. And that's something we've certainly lost a sense of in contemporary society. It is true that up until about 1920s, when people wrote more letters, the education system was based more on a classical model, and that's through our classical heritage. We get a sense that beauty is somehow related to the divine or the sacred, and that's increasingly being trashed. And what's become fashionable is, looking at ugly art, ugly buildings, physically making yourself ugly through various means, piercings and tattoos. Shouldn't really say that, lots of people got tattoos. But there does seem to be this cult, a slide towards repudiation of the past, repudiation of things that are beautiful. I went to Rome on a trip with a good friend of mine from university, and he brought a friend who was an academic from a university in the north of Ireland, and she was a militant atheist, and she also didn't like the patriarchal imagery of Rome. So you can imagine she wasn't having a very good time. She didn't want to go into any churches. She hated all the sculptures of the Caesars. And I said, but can't you appreciate that this is really beautiful? These things are beautiful. And her response was, beauty is fascist.
No.
Yes. And it's one of those yellow highlighter moments for me. When she said it, it was almost as though her words were lit up on a screen in front of me. Beauty is fascist. And I've never forgotten it. It must have been about 10 years ago. I thought, my gosh, there are some people who are really far gone. Yes. They really, really do associate beauty, beautiful landscapes, anything. I suppose their appreciation of so much in the world is marred by this indoctrination that I guess they've picked up from university. It's not a natural thing to feel like that. One's natural way of evolving as a human being is to feel in harmony with one's environment, especially the natural environment. I come from a long line of farmers, and I went walking in the Lake District almost every weekend as a child. Nobody really explained to me that it was beautiful. They didn't say, try and interpret this landscape and perceive it as beautiful. It was just obvious that it was. You have a bond with it, a natural bond, as Roger Scruton says. When that happens, you feel at home. You have a sense of peace. You don't run around with an angry expression trying to break everything apart. So, and that's one of the reasons I moved to Bath, because it's a beautiful place, a UNESCO site. It's one of the most Italianate cities in Britain. And you do feel at home, even if it's locked down, there are no people on the streets. The buildings themselves feel like your friends. They have familiar shapes and proportions.
It's a beautiful, beautiful way of putting it, actually. You talked there about feeling part of the land and things arising organically from that land. Another thing I would say, that one of the qualities about your work, and particularly your country house work and gardens, really, Jonathan, is that they do have this very English quality about them. And I think I read somewhere that you listen to some of the great English composers when you're working, such as Elgar or Vaughan Williams or Gerald Finzi. which again, I love all of those. What would you say is the essence of Englishness? I think you've already kind of told us in a way with the landscape, but is there something else? I mean, how would you sum it up?
Well, I'll tell you, but you have to agree to do 6 more podcasts or six more recordings, because this is something that we could talk about for a long time. But when anybody asks me about that, I usually refer them to a book by Roger Scruton, which I think is his masterpiece. It's called England and Elegy. England and Elegy. Don't be put off by the cover. The cover is very unattractive. It's sort of a block print of somebody playing cricket. But in that, it is a eulogy to all the things really that we're in the process of losing, which is tragic. But in the process of articulating what those things are, not just aesthetic, but sort of the English common law, it makes you fall in love with Britain again. It is an amazing book. And normally when I read a book, I underline a few lines. I think I underlined the entire book. So I'm going to reread it again in the near future. But my own feelings about what Britishness or what Englishness is very much connected to the landscape. I think more than many European countries, Brits think of the White Cliffs at Dover, or they think of those sort of bucolic scenes in Yorkshire of the Dales, or they think of the South Downs. And when I've lived overseas in Brussels or America, when I think of England, I don't think of wheelie bins and wet tarmac in London. I think of these beautiful Arcadian landscapes. I think of the tarns and the fells and the Lake District. But also we have this incredible rich literary tradition. So of course, against the background of Elgar's music, you're hearing poetry of Shakespeare's sonnets. We have such an extraordinary culture, which the rest of the world is so jealous of, and that's why it's so extraordinary that anybody here could be in any way negative about Britain. In America, if you say, "Oh, I don't like living in Detroit, I don't like LA," somebody will very quickly say to you, "Well, go then, just go." But in Britain, it seems to be sort of quite accepted for people to sit around complaining about the country, and I don't have any patience for that at all. My Instagram account does the same thing, I think, as Roger's books. It celebrates the great traditions and the great people of Britain. And I was lucky. When I was very young, I was brought up with an entire set of Arthur Mee's children's encyclopedias, which were published initially about 1908. I think mine were printed in the 20s. And they were set out in different sections, and they would have great men, great scientists, great artists, great engineers, and great painters. And so I felt as though, as I grew up, I wanted to be part of this group. I wanted to be part of this club. I chose art. I wanted to be a great artist. And that was part of being patriotic. It was part of your way of working within the world, and it implied that there was a civic duty behind which the career that you chose. You didn't pick a career because it would make you the maximum amount of money. It would be a way of you integrating into a fine tradition and then creating something new to pass on to the future.